We have a couple more things to talk about in shaders, and then we're going to actually get an assignment that is sort of doing what I sort of showed you the other day when we went through some of these shaders. So I actually have the file open that we're gonna go through, and we talked a whole lot about the construction of a good shader in Arnold and using the Arnold shader. And we got through, like I said, we got through most of it, but there's a few other little features that are available to you that I wanted to show today. And that way you sort of have an overview of everything that you have available to you. So, okay, so like I said, what we have here is a clean, all these guys are going to be all cleaned off, and just to sort of explain it while we're here. Ooh. Hold on. Just to explain it while we're here. Okay. What I'm going to have is a series of photos, and then they're just each surface that we're going to try and make is called out here. But I'm going to give you a photo that we're trying to be in the ballpark and try and hit, and that's basically the overall concept. Because we talked about how objects can go from having a highlight or having a shine that's so diffuse that it doesn't really look like a shine, but it's there. Things like boulders and rocks, and then all the way through things like golds and polished coppers and things like that. Okay, we're adding another one on the end here called car paint, because it's sort of a variant of super shiny things in a way. And then I'll put it off to the side here, maybe because it's kind of just a little bit different. And then we talked about how these are all surfaces where light doesn't, for the most part, doesn't go through the object. And then we talked about objects where light does go through the object and how they go through the object and what they do, or the material, and the levels that they can do that, and then what you get out of it. Okay, so that's all we're really trying to do here, just basically demonstrate what we talked about on Monday. Okay, so I'm not going to go over these really, because we talked a lot about these, but I am going to go through some of the new ones that are some of the new features in the shader that we didn't talk about, and how you can use those. Okay, so first up was car paint. We didn't talk about that the other day, and essentially one of the tricks of things like car paint is just something that you would call glazed. Okay, anything with a coat on top of it, the Arnold shader gives you a little something to help you out with that, and it's called coat. Okay, so one example I had, and this is literally usually a coat that's added on top of something, right? So when they paint a car, they paint it with paint, and then they come back in with what they call a clear coat, right? So it's sprayed on top of there, right? And you can also think of things like ceramic is somewhat like that, right? Where sometimes it's a little shinier underneath, and then there's a glaze literally on top of it that makes it shiny, right? And this one's a little, it's up for debate in that you could probably get away with just using that first specular layer, but sometimes it's nice to layer two on top of there, right? Or two shininess layers on it, a very diffuse one, and then a light shininess coat on top of there. Okay, so you can think of coat, and it's down here. So we talked about the base color, your specular, which is your shine, right? That's on top here, or yeah, and then we talked about transmission, which means either light that's going through the object or trying to go through the object and getting scattered around a little bit. We talked about subsurface, which is light that really gets scattered around inside there, and then here's your coat, right? So if I turn off my base, go to black with that, and I turn off my specular, my highlight. Okay, so I have nothing. And I come down to coat and I start bringing it in, you'll see that it's almost like I'm just turning my specular back up, right? So and it's pretty much the same concept in that it's just another layer, another way for you to coat the top of the object, right? So if I went back here and I turned it off. Okay. Turned it off. Come on, there we go. And I turned my specular up a little bit, but then I made it rough to be sort of that sort of middle, or not middle, but that base sheen that you're getting on the base, whatever the material is. Then maybe I'll bring back in a little bit of color. Okay, so that's what we have. That we have our highlight here that's a little fuzzed out. I can just mix some of this back in there, and I'll have the fuzz under, the fuzzy highlight underneath. But then I'll have a nice sheen on top like that, right? And like I said, this is kind of rare. Not a lot of materials have this, but it's cool that you have it. Sometimes steel, aluminum is kind of like that, and then it has a shinier layer on top, but a diffuse underneath it. Like a decent aluminum is kind of like this, and then quite diffuse underneath. Maybe go a little darker, but then bring up this. So this is my first specular that's quite diffuse but quite shiny still. Bring up my metalness, but then on top I still have this. I still have a shine, so I have a kind of a metally surface, but with a coat on top of it. Because some metals, they do that too, just so they don't corrode and things like that. They cover them with a clear spray of a plastic or whatever, right? So, like I said, it's literally just another coat that's available to you that's see-through, can be shiny, can be not so shiny. It's all just, when you go to examine a surface, these are the kind of things that you see. Like I said, this isn't the greatest example, but let me actually wait a second. I pulled up a car paint here. Boom, boom, boom. Sorry, my car paint is right here. So this is a good example. So you see here, you've got a blue, and then you've got a very, diffused out metal flaky color. But then on top, you've got hard reflections here. And this is, like I said, this is from that top coat. So if you went to make this, which you will be doing, you have, like I said, a deep base, a fuzzed out or feathered out specular to make your blue flakes, and then coat it over the top with the coat layer. So like I said, it's not exactly the thing that you use every day, but you'll see if I go like this and I say, so here's my deeper blue for my base, mix it in, and I'm going to make my flake a little blue-green. Okay, mix it in quite a bit. There we go. So you can see that's a rough approximation. So I've got metal flake, a deep blue, and maybe I'll bump it up even a little more. Might be a little too rough. So yeah, like I said, a metal flake, nice. But this I would bring my roughness down. So there we go. So I get a nice glossy top layer. So I think you can see it. Let me see if I can zoom in. There we go. So it looks even flakier here because as it gets its render together, it's going to clear up. But I think you can see what's going on here. So there's lots of, not a lot of surfaces, I should say, that do this, but some do, and it's just nice to have this layer. So when you need it, it's there, and when you don't, you can just leave it off, and by default, it's off. Okay, so that's your coat layer. Subsurface we talked about. So emission is, we talked about making a mesh object a light, and that's one of the options in the Arnold tab here. Okay, it's one of these. Is it this one? No, this one. Nope, that's not it. There it is. So when you select an object, it turns into a light, but it disappears and blah, blah, blah. So that's the more sort of efficient way of doing it. But if you need to, you can also, an object can be emissive or kick out light essentially, right? So all you got to do is put a number in there, and boom, it starts to kick out light, and it ignores the other, basically the light emitting properties override anything else here. So basically the rest of the surface is useless, but that's kind of the concept here. So if I drag this into the scene, the cool thing about this is, you know, like I said, it's not as efficient as the mesh light is, but it also shows up in the scene. So if you were making a bulb or something like that we talked about, you know, instead of having to make two surfaces, this, you'll see that this is it in the render. Okay, back up a little. Here we go. So you see what's going on here. It's kicking out light, and you can color it, and you can crank it up as much as you like. It you know, it wants to go to like, you know, 0 to 1 or something, or 0 to 10, but there's nothing stopping you from typing 30 in here and getting a whole lot more light out of it, which is true with a lot of Maya's input boxes. It may tell you, oh, it only wants to go to 0 to 1, but sometimes you can put in a higher number and it'll take it and, you know, do something else with it. So you see how slow it is. I mean, this, like I said, it's not the best way to go for this kind of object. Whoa, what happened? Okay, so anyway, so emissive just means, you know, does the object kick out light, and that's what that part does, right? Now keep in mind, so this is all in the same shader. So I'm gonna turn that back down and go back to my car paint. So thin film is kind of, it's another one of those ones that you don't need all that often, and it's best just to show you their examples. Thin film is like things like you see on like on bubbles. You know how bubbles have that like rainbow in them. Oil does that. You know, this kind of stuff that's on top, right? So it's just kind of a weird effect. You see a good example of it here is where it goes from green to blue and sort of changes around. So this is what that does as you sort of crank this up and change the thickness level. Okay, it's just easier to show you what it does on here. So this is another one of those, you know, effects that you don't need all that often, but it's nice that it's out there. Like, you know, it's really practically made just for making soap bubbles and beetles, you know, but they should just call it soap bubbliness and beetleness or something, and that would be the end of it. So that's what that does, and you just you change those, and it'll throw that film on top as another layer. Ooh, crap. Uh-oh. This machine is not the fastest machine ever. There we go. Oh, great. Crap. Sorry, hold on. Huh. Hold on a second. I broke my there we go. There we go. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back down. So, you know, it's something to play with if you need such a thing. Okay, so the last thing that we have to talk about is something that's interestingly just sort of hidden down, not hidden, but kind of not important down here. But it's a thing called bump mapping. So remember how we talked about when you go to model things, you know, eventually you sort of have to quit modeling stuff, meaning like, you know, an object could be, you know, almost infinitely detailed if you really dig in there, and after a while you won't want to model these little tiny details, right? So a good example is you know, the texture like on a rock or something like that, right? You're not really going to want to model every last little, you know, little tiny piece of that kind of stuff, right? So what bump mapping does is it's sort of it is a trick. It's sort of a shading trick that allows you to make the surface look that it has sort of values that it doesn't have in the render, or sorry, in the model, right? Meaning, like I said, sort of, and there are limits. You know, there are obviously there's definitely limits to this, but a good example is just sort of like, you know, textures that are on stuff that are very, very fine, but you can still see them and you can't sort of ignore it. You know, like if you touch your keyboard, I think we all have the same. No, I have a different keyboard. Well, like the stipple that's on a keyboard is, you know, it's like you can see it if you get close enough, but if you back up, you could kind of not so much, right? So and there's a million things you can do with them. So it's sort of, let me just show it to you real quick, and you'll see what it does. And hopefully it'll make a lot more sense real quick. So to get a bump map, you just get your shader. Okay. We come down here, we click this. Oops. Okay, and then it's just going to ask you what do you want to plug into your bump map, and I'm going to go for a I'm going to go for the solid fractal, okay, which is just a noise pattern, okay. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to turn down. I'm going to sort of simplify this shader so that there's not so much going on. It's kind of a bad example. So we'll go back to gray with our base layer. I'm going to turn this down. Okay. Okay. So, like I said, bump mapping is just a shading trick. So meaning like there isn't any new geometry being made, even though you're sort of getting a lot out of it. In fact, let me show you a better example. Would be the checker, right? So if I get what do they call it? Yeah, checkerboard. So I'm going to plug the checkerboard in there instead. So when you click bump map, it's going to add this node, which is a bump 3D, okay, and then it's going to. I remember I selected solid fractal, okay, which is that one that produces cloudy noise, right? So instead I'm going to go over to a checkerboard so it'll make it a lot easier to see. So if I plug this into, basically take this over. Oops, it's a black and white color, so I'll take my black and white, plug it in there. I'm going to reset this. Okay. Repeat. 5 times. Okay, I'm going to go back to my shader and put a little more, just get a little more gray. Make it a little less rough. Get rid of that coat. The coat's all throwing things off too, so that's the coat. There it is. Okay. So now I'm back to just a regular kind of surface here. Okay. For some reason, why is it using? Oh, odd. Just a second. For some reason, it's not listening. Essentially, it's still showing me the checker, or showing me the noise that I plugged in there. In fact, it should be off, so it doesn't make any sense. All right, let me start over. Okay, checker. Arnold standard shader. So I got myself a regular shader. I come back down to bump mapping, click this. Wait for it to, okay, go back. Okay, so now it's once again, it's plugged in a solid fractal, which is that noisy pattern. So you should see the surface start to get messed up next time it tries to render this. There it goes. So you see what you get there? You immediately get something that looks, it has highlights and it respects where the lights are at, but it has this crunchy surface underneath, and that's because of this. Of this. So it's taking this surface, this noise, putting it on the object, and then faking. Man alive. So without it, so if I take it off, clean surface, I put it back on. Man. we go. Normal. Okay. Boom. I get this out of it. I get this crunchiness. Okay. So any surface or any type of texture can be put in there to simulate this kind of stuff, right? So the very basic, like, you know, these big cracks and things like that can't be simulated with a bump map, but all this stuff can, you know, because you wouldn't have to model all this stuff if you just put a few of these major cracks in here, move this around, and then put a bump map that looked like this, basically craters and stuff like that. You would get this without having to model all that stuff, okay? And this applies to, you know, like I said, what I was trying to do with my checker here was put another texture in my bump value. You see the bump 3D node right here. So I'm taking the output of the checker, plugging it in there, and it's ignoring it. You know, Maya doesn't like some of these things, so maybe that's a bad example. Well, let's see. So let me grab just a file and try and put that in there and see what we get. So here's a oops. This machine is like walking through molasses. Okay. So here's the image loader. Remember, we've used the AI image loader to load up things to put onto lights like maps. So I'm going to get rid of this checker. It might not like that one. And I'm going to load an image, any image. Let's see what we can find here. No images. No. I'm trying to look for something that has something going on. Here we go, this fire, whatever, that'll work. So I take the output of this fire, and I take only one of the color channels. Okay, color channels. And I plug it into the bump value. Man, what the shit? Let me see if I put it on an object. So this is not what it's supposed to, it should be swapping out those the images. So I don't understand what's going on here. In fact, like when you disconnect it, it should, I shouldn't see that on there any longer. So I'm not exactly sure what the hell's going on. Let's see if it renders in the scene properly. Nope. Well, that's not it. Jesus Christ. Yeah, see, now that's correct since we unhooked it. Sorry, everybody, this machine is absolutely dog slow. I don't know what to tell you. Absolutely everything is just killing it. Okay, so here's the surface. I'm going to apply it to the object. Right-clicking, trying to apply, try to get the menu to apply it. I'm not getting it. There we go. Okay. Okay, so if I go back to what I had before. I'm just going to pause this. I don't think this is going to work. So the idea with bump mapping, like I said, is that essentially you can apply maps and textures, like when we played with the when I brought out the cloth one. the cloth 2D texture. This would be a way to get cloth to have an actual, not only just a color, so I could wire, so if I took 2 of these, so this one will be my bump map. So wherever it's white, it's going to push the object, or appear to push the object out, and where it's black, it's going to push the, appear to push the object in, okay? So, again, it's probably not going to work, but what the heck? So, here we go. Refresh. Doesn't work. I'm going to restart Maya. Hold on. Save. This worked on Monday. When I rebooted, it seemed to behave a bit better. Okay, I'm just going to start fresh without the scene. Maybe there's something in the scene that's giving it a problem. So I'm going to go back into Hypershade eventually. I'm going to try and create a new shader, a new Arnold shader. Okay, drop it in here. Okay. Come back down to geometry. I don't know what the fuck that is. Okay, go down to geometry, bump mapping. I'm gonna try do cloth again. Change texture, and there we go. Okay, so now it's functioning properly. So, okay. So if I go back over to the cloth shader, it's obviously way too, sort of big, whatever you want to say. So I'm just going to scale it down. And when we cover UV mapping, we'll talk about how these things work. So we can just kind of ignore this right now. But what I'm doing is just trying to up the density of this. There we go. Okay, so like I said, what this is doing here is it's adding a fake. It's not just a texture that's sitting on it. It's actually interacting with the light. If you look at it, like up and through here, it looks like it's facing the light, whereas inside here, it looks like a texture that's not on the surface but making up the surface. And like I said, the big thing to remember is that it's not actually creating. You see the edge will be perfectly clean because it's a trick of the shader, that it's not an actual, it's not something that's actually happening, or whatever you want to say. Like, it's not creating new stuff and new geometry and moving it around to look like this. It's just, like I said, a trick, right? So for something very, very small, like I said, textures on plastic and things like that, or maybe something stamped into an object, if you gave it a little bit of text, right? Like if you thought of, like I said, if you think of like, how a lot of plastic things have on the other side, they have like, warnings and stuff like that. Like all our mice have that, right? If you flip that over, it's got a bunch of warnings and, it says HP and all this stuff. Well, you wouldn't want to model all those little bits of text and all that stuff, and a bump map would be a perfect perfect place for you to use such a thing. So you would make this in 2D, meaning like in Photoshop, right? So let me try and see if it'll behave. So to make a bump map, I'm just gonna fill with black. So like I said, wherever it's black, it's not going to bump out, but wherever it's white, or light or whatever, like you can do variants, of course, so this is my test bump map. That's big-ish. Okay, we'll see if it'll behave. So if I save this out the desktop as a JPEG, whatever, Untitled, okay, and I load this back in. Oh, I've got a couple of copies. So okay, an image loader. All right, that's fine. That's fine. I'm going to point it at the one I just made. Hopefully this will behave. Untitled. So this is my little test. Okay. I wire one of the colors. It's not an RG. Bump map being black through white, not or just a value, not a color. I just take one of the channels, like the red channel, plug it into my bump map node. Sometimes it takes a second to, oh yeah. So let's see here, Arnold, texture, image. Just gonna do it fresh and see what I get. It's very weird that it doesn't, when you unhook it, I'm not getting updates, which is kind of bizarre, but it is what it is. So okay, so now I've reconnected image, but I'm not getting updates. All right. I think there's something wrong with my machine. Something is very weird here. So. Texture. Okay. AI image, load, untitled, black and white map. Nothing. There we go. Okay, so you can see where this ended up landing, but so it's kind of oddly placed, but it's doing what it's supposed to do. So you can see how this looks like. I'm getting, this looks like, within reason that it's modeled on there and that it's extruded out of the surface, right? It's catching the light. There's a little shadow right here. It's really crunchy for some reason through there, but it's basically doing what it's supposed to do. So any of these values are going to get, lighter values are going to get pushed away from, or appear to get pushed away from the surface, and darker values are just going to stay where they're at. So that's kind of that is the idea, So you can do a whole lot with that as long as you're not sort of getting way close to it. So if I back up here and let this render. Okay, back way up. Jeez. There we go. You see that it's fairly effective. It's not bad. It's a trick that works up to a point, but then after a while you need to actually model it. Like if I was going to come in this close, I would have to model these letters on the object somehow. You'd have to obviously figure out a technique to do that, but for a whole lot of high frequency little detail like that, it works just great. Like I said, putting variants on boulders like this, all this stuff would work fairly well if you put a rocky surface on your object. This wouldn't, because it's just too big, and the edge isn't going to change because this isn't a change of the actual underlying model. It's just a trick. So that's that is the point. So anyway, so bump map, even though it's kind of down there low and it's under geometry, it's really handy. You can do a whole lot with it. It can ref up surfaces. It can make light minute changes. It can create textures. It can, like I showed here, put text and things like that on little objects, anything that you wouldn't want to go in and model like crazy. So yeah, so that's basic. That's the idea there. So if you come over to the bump node that it creates, bump 2D number 2, okay, it pretty much has one in and out. It has an image or a value in, okay, which is going to be a black and white image of any type, or, well, whatever type will work today. And then it just has a depth, right? So you can actually make it more subtle by going, you know, like if I go to 0.5, you'll see, so it's getting more and more subtle. Let me go back to, let me try putting another, probably a really bad idea, but I'm going to try and put a noise back in there, like so. This will show off a lot more. If it works, it's going to show off a lot. You know what those values do. You know how changing them makes a lot of difference. Okay. Boom. Wow. So the good news is this shouldn't behave this way on your machine. I don't know why exactly it's behaving this way, and it does behave like this for me at home, but here we are. So almost feels like it just locked. Okay, I'll start over again. Grab myself Arnold shader and 3D, you know, I'll go down to geometry, bump mapping, solid fractal. There we go. Okay, so there you go. So you see what kind of, you know, surface this is faking. And so if I make any changes over here, meaning like, you know, if you play with, there we go, what this looks like. So by changing the ratio, I get a whole lot less variance. If I come back to unhit or turn off solo and come back to the object, so now it's a little smoother. So if you know, if this is too rocky for you and you're just looking to put a little bit of surface on there, you just bring your bump value down. I'll put it to 0.2, 0.1, 0.05 maybe. I'm not sure it's listening. So yeah, it's not updating properly. So the effect should appear to be going down, but it's not. So if you play with this on your own, you'll see that it actually does something versus does nothing on my machine. Good demo. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. Jeez. I'll plug my laptop in. Okay, so play. You know, like I would play with this instead because I can't effectively show you what's going on here because something's wrong here. Long story short is, you know, if I put this at 0, the effect should go away, and the higher the value, the more it looks like it's extruding that surface away from the object. Okay, but I think you can see, you know, real quickly, you know, how useful this can be. You know, like how would you possibly go in and model all this junk on this surface, right? You know, it'd be next to impossible. Okay, unless you absolutely had to get in one of the crevices, and then you just have to deal with it. But you know, like for this right here, it's perfectly effective. It looks great. It looks reasonably good, and you can plug anything you like into there. Layered levels of this noise, you know, you could put them on top of each other, whatever you need to do. You know, it's just, like I said, it very, very handy, and you know, a way, like I said, to get away from all this trying to model every last little damn thing. You know, it's just, you got to remember that it has its limits because it's not an actual changing of the geometry. It's just a trick of the shading. But it looks pretty good. I mean, that looks like a little goobery, you know, teapot meteor kind of thing. So, you know, there you go. So that's that's really pretty much the last thing that we need to worry about in the stock Arnold shader. Now, you know, that's a lot of stuff. You know, like just these other ones are just extra Maya doohickeys. You don't really need to worry too much about these. Maybe another class. Yeah, you don't need to worry about these. Advanced. Yeah, you don't need to worry about that. So that's the bulk of it. And that's in the geometry section here, and it's like I said, it's very, very, very handy. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. I guess the last thing that we talked about transmission, which is light going through objects, and what happens, meaning does the light get bent, does the light just go through, does the light disperse, and all that stuff. You do also have opacity here, which literally just makes the object less opaque, as you might imagine. But remember, you can see how fake this looks, so you may need this sometimes, if you were making a ghost or something like that, or whatever. This literally doesn't do anything to the light that's coming through the object. It's literally just like in Photoshop if you make a layer less opaque. So like I said, it has its usage, but not so much anymore, because it's not it's not correctly showing what's going on through the object. It's just, like I said, just making it disappear. So sometimes you might need that. I guess a good example this would be if you were making curtains is probably a good example, right? Light is getting diffracted or refracted and things like that through curtains, but you could ignore it really for the most part. Nobody would notice if you made curtains that just were largely, you were doing some of the transparency by just knocking down the opacity of the overall object. That's kind of a good example, because sometimes you can just, like I said, you can ignore some of these things. It's all about how inspected something is going to be. It's like I said, if I needed to fly in here along the edge of this teapot in the animation, obviously you're not going to get away with a bump map for this. But if it's just an object in a room or part of a scene, this is going to work out just great. Looks fine. It's not so bad. And the same thing with the opacity. If you're going to fly in and out of these curtains, then maybe this trick isn't going to work so well, and you need to mess with the transmission so that things are getting through the object properly. All right. Yeah. So like I said, that's most of them. And continue. And once again, don't forget, use the while we're using Arnold, use the Arnold shader and stay away from your Lamberts and your blends and all these other ones, because this is where you're going to get all your good options to do all your transmissions, your coats, all the shininess, all this stuff. And once again, if you open up one of these other shading types, okay, if I go into Maya and I bring just a blend in there, you'll see you can do transparency, but it's that fake transparency that I was just talking about. It's not correct. It's not bending light. It doesn't look like glass. It just looks like something that's pasted over the top of the scene, right? You have ambient color, blah, blah, blah. So it's got a few of these things, but, that's it. It goes down to special effects, and that's the end of it. That's because it's an old shader, and it doesn't have the good, all the extra options that you get out of an Arnold shader. So, stay with your Arnold shader, and as it stands right now, learn what you can do with the Arnold shader, because you can make just about anything with it, okay? It's an uber shader, as they call it, because it does just about everything, right? So yeah, we talked about the base, your specular, which is your shininess, which is your all the way from chrome to just surface sheen, essentially. Okay, and transmission being the light that goes through an object and how it's handled, and subsurface when you really want to get down to minute and get object or get light scattering through a surface, like through plants, leaves, and skin and things like that, or wax. Your coat is just your extra coat if you want it. Emission is if your object needs to give off some light. Thin film is that crazy rainbowy kind of deal on beetles and stuff like that. And then you got your bump map that's down in your geometry. So all these things are available to you along here, to plug in whatever you need to. And once again, you have all these 2D and 3D textures. We're not going to worry too much about a lot of these, but you know, some of them are really handy, the solid fractal and the leather, and some of these things are useful, you know. So so that's basically the last of that, the last of the Arnold, you know, the pieces of the Arnold shader. Okay. So what we want to do here is, you know, we saw last week this scene, and that we talked about, you know, shine, or, you know, or specular highlight, whatever you want to call it, how objects, you know, went from very, very little to all the way up into, you know, your polished, your chromes and things like that. And then I just talked about car paint, because that's kind of a, like I said, it's kind of a weird one that I'm going to put off here, because that's about the coat. And then we talked about objects that are transparent and translucent, going from, you know, plastic with a little bit of transparency to, you know, things like these candy that it goes through. I'm thinking of those gummy candies, and I had a picture of one. Well, that'll be in the, it'll be in the collection of surfaces or whatever, to leaves that are, you know, I put a light underneath this so it can show through that, and you'll get translucency if you get it set up properly, to frosted glass that's, you know, largely transparent, but is messing up the light, which you can play with if you go into your transmission area here. Remember, transmission, I wish they didn't call it these kind of things, but remember, scatter is the thing that did that, and as well as roughing up the specular surface too will give you that nice. Well, we'll just do it right now. Scatter and roughness will give you that nice frosty glass kind of look, right? So you can tell that it's still getting through this surface, but it's getting messed up on the surface, right? And then all the way down to things that are just glass, that are tinted glass or clear glass, and you know, things like that. So what I did is, like I said, I labeled all these what we want to try and get out of each one of these surfaces. Okay, there's lights in the scene, but no other surfaces, and I just put some photos in here of what we're trying to hit. Just the sort of super duper diffused sheen of a rock. Rubber bands, you know, we talked about rubber before, but here's kind of rubber bands. You can ignore the translucency in this if you want, you know. I'm kind of thinking more of these blue ones that are less translucent. Okay, that one's not working. Then we moved into steel, things that are shiny. I mean, this is actually a fairly decent example too of ones that have a coat on it. You know, notice how there's sort of a very shiny layer, but there's kind of an underlying reflective but diffused layer, or roughed up layer. So this is, you could actually put a little bit of the coat on there if you wanted to play with that, to probably get closer to that. So this is the kind of steel that we're trying to hit. This is a polished copper that we want to hit instead of a chrome. And you can do that just by tinting the reflection amount, and other than that, it's very, very reflective, obviously. This is a decent car paint that we can hit. So this is a nice blue glass that I'm thinking of for this last blue glass. Wait on the end. Here's some cloth stuff that's not like the nylon that we saw the other day. They have a little bit of reflection, or a diffused reflection here, specular, but not a ton. So these are sort of more in the middle, like cottons and things like that, or blends. So one of these is the cloth that we want to try and hit, and then here's a nice frosty glass that I was just kind of doing. It's obviously tinted like a blue-green, but you see what's going on here, that it's diffusing on both in the reflection and as it goes through the object. And then we have a kind of a leaf that's it's going to be translucent, so you can use the transmission or even subsurface scattering if you want to try that out. So these don't need to be mapped to look exactly like this. We haven't gotten to that, but if you can hit this kind of green and light is getting through there, like any of this green, that'll be great. And same thing, we're not trying to texture these rocks, if you don't want to, and same with this. We don't have to worry about the white that's on here. It's just about the base surface that we're really talking about, okay? But at the same time, I mean, there's nothing stopping us from you know, taking some of that solid fractal texture that I keep pumping into stuff here, like it's a good one, solid fractal one. You know, like if you're gonna do that rock, you know, you could get a solid fractal, take the color out of it, and pump it into the base color. Go back here, I turn my transmission off. You know, if you start messing with this, like maybe scale it up. You know, I'll start to get other colors in there. Like I said, solid fractal is a nice one because it creates that noise, and you can actually color it. So if I wanted, you know, my rock, I wanted to bump that up, maybe color gain. So you just have to learn the values here, but you see how I'm starting to get like color variance, you know, in the surface, you know. So like I said, we're not trying to, like, you know, worry about textures and things like that. We're really just trying to nail the way that light either bounces off the surface or goes through the surface and what it does, you know, and that's why all these sort of, you know, these show that range in a lot of ways. So the picture of this mission is just Lego, so it's just plastic that is quite non-translucent. So that's what we're trying to hit with this first plastic, and it's in the line here, Lego plastic. But then with the second one, we're hoping to hit something that's a little more, got a little translucence through it, okay? So that's the concept there. And yep, there's your steel. And the blue, that's pretty nice. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do for next week. You know, like I said, don't worry too much about, you know, if you see textures. If we can nail color, the amount of highlight on there, the way that the highlight works, then we'll be golden. You know, that's where we're really at right now. So, you know, once again, like, you know, this is an okay getting there rock, because you can see how diffuse it is. It's, you know, that's a start. You know what I mean? Because we're nailing the amount of highlight and how it's working on the object. Oh, it just turned color. There we go. Okay, so yeah, so that's all we're doing, and now, like I said, we've covered everything in the Arnold shader that we really need to be concerned with. You know, I think we saw some good examples on how it works, and now it's just about sort of playing with it and you know, getting some different looks out of those guys. Scene's already lit, so you don't need to worry about that. So if you hit your Arnold renderer here. Sorry, I got a couple of versions running here apparently. There's another one. Okay, if you hit your renderer, wait, maybe that's what this is. Okay, don't forget about this button here, right? So if you're you know, working on a shader, okay, if you select your object and hit this button, it's only going to render the one that you're currently selecting, right? So if I select here, this is a way to like get a lot of quick feedback. So if I was messing with this shader, that's what this guy does. So if I let that go, it's going to render the whole scene. If I click that again, it's going to just render the one object. So it's a great, like I said, it's a great way to get a lot of quick feedback. And it actually even trickles out into, if I click my shader, oh, I'll lose my render window. Let's try it again. So the cool thing about this too is that it'll actually show you the sort of contribution of whatever you're currently editing on the object. Man, so I'm just trying to find my render window. It's gone and it won't come back up. So anyway, basically what I was trying to show you, oh, there it goes. Okay, so I have that selected. I have render only selected checked. Oh, they're docked, that's why. Funny. Cute. Okay. What I'm trying to show you is if I plug in a surface or plug in a texture like so, it'll show it to you on the object. There we go. So if I click the shaders, notice how, so this one is on the ground, but notice how it's showing me, so if I click the solid fractal, now it's just going to show me that. So if I edit that texture, okay, you'll see it actually on the object doing its thing, which is really cool. So instead of just, you know, trying to see it in this guy, you see what it's going to do. Then if I click my shader, it's going to show me what it actually is doing. So let me put this on an object. There we go. Okay, so like I said, so now since I have this shader selected and then I have this selected in my viewport or my rendering frame buffer, it's going to show me what the whole output is like for anything that's selected with that or connected to that. If I come back here, it's just going to show that texture, right? So I can interactively mess with this texture, like if I wanted to make it really gnarly in detail, then click back over here, you'll see it now shaded and everything. So it's really cool. It's really handy. So if I put it into my specular color, maybe disconnect it. So when you come back over here, it's sort of, you know, what it's doing is a little harder to see, like, you know, where is it black and where is it white, but you can see things that are going on here that if I disconnect it, won't be there. There we go. So now it's perfectly clean, connected back up to my specular color. I get variance, right? But if I click the texture, I just see the texture on it, so I can do, like I said, I can do whatever I want. I can, you know, can make it a little fuzzier. I can make it brighter. There we go. So this basically just keeps adding detail. So if I just wanted to kind of light variance on it, I could do that. Maybe if I wanted it darker. So then click your shader, boom, now you see what's going on with it, because see, it's plugged in right there and it's showing you now exactly what it's going to do with that value when you plug it in there. Okay, really super handy, really handy, because you don't have to constantly try and wonder what exactly your texture underneath an assigned to something is doing, because you can see it. Because it's like, okay, I know that where it's white it's going to be very shiny, where it's dark it's not. So let me see, maybe I'll even maybe we'll scale this down a little bit. Oops. 0.5. So now you see it's bigger, maybe a little even smaller. So now we have a lot of variance. Let's see here, ratio, no. I'll bring my frequency, there we go. Okay, so if I want to make something, you know, really just have big globs of variance, and I go back to here, you can see what it's doing. Low shine, high shine, but it's very weird looking. So like I said, a really great way to sit and mess with these kind of textures before you see what they do on an object, okay? So yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. So I think like I said, I'll be around if you want to play with this. But this is essentially what we're doing for our assignment. All the stuff will be attached to the assignment in Canvas. And if you have any questions, just either ask me today or email me during the incoming week or so. But hopefully these make sense. Arnold shader is very cool. There's lots of cool features, especially if your computer isn't taking a massive dump like mine is. So, all right, thank you very much.